What is up, everyone? We're back again with the top five new brews for Bloomburrow. This is deck number three, and things are getting a little bit spicy here. So, hope you enjoy this one. Today, we are looking at mono black discard. Discard has been a fact that was good maybe way back in like Ravnica, Return to Ravnica set. It's also seen a little bit of play in older formats with Waste Not, a card which kind of pays you off for making your opponent discard stuff. But we didn't really have a lot of good discard payoffs in the last few years, maybe because Wizards thinks that it kind of feels bad. And of course, Thoughtseize is notorious in Legacy and older formats. So um, I won't say that this deck is a Thoughtseize deck, but it does have a very nice discard payoff that I think we can take to win the game, especially in the standard that's been rotated. So some of the more notorious decks are going to be gone, and it gives us kind of a chance to pick off the opponents. So let's take a look. We actually have a huge plethora of one drop discard effects in standard right now. We have Hopeless Nightmare, which is an enchantment that discards a card from the opponent's hand, and they lose 2 life. And then later you can sack it to scry 2. We also have Tiny Bones joins up, another pretty good legendary enchantment, which makes them discard. And whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can mill the opponent a card and make them lose a life. So more ways to kind of drain the opponent a little bit. So you're doing some incidental damage with these early cards. Um, I'm also trying out a couple of these Ruthless Negotiation. It's a new card from Bloomburrow. It's a discard effect for 1 mana, but late game you can flash it back and you discard and draw a card. So uh, it's got a pretty big upside in the late game because a lot of times late game you draw it and it can't do anything, but now you can at least get a card out of it, so it's not terrible. There are a few other good discard options as well, and we could also just run the Fora of the Tiny Bones joins up. But Ruthless Negotiation seemed like a decent try, so we're going to give it a shot. And then to go along with our one drop package, we have Cut Down, Solid Removal in black. We have Tiny Bones, a way to kind of abuse the fact that we're making the opponent discard stuff. Basically, whenever Tiny Bones deals damage to the opponent, then you can cast things from their graveyard. So you can get back some of the things that they were forced to discard. And of course, it has Tiny Bones has Death Touch, which is just solid on its own, so you can block with it and kill some big creature if you need to. And then this is one of the new All-Star cards, the payoff for discarding Bandit's Talent, 1 in a black, and when it enters the battlefield, the opponent discards 2 cards for 2 mana, unless they discarded a non-land card. So either they discard the non-land card that they don't want to get rid of, or they have to get rid of 2 lands. So either way, not very pretty for the opponent. Um, and if even if they discard 1 card, we're not too unhappy with it because it has more levels to this enchantment. So that's the first phase. The level 2 one is actually the big discard payoff because at the beginning of the opponent's up upkeep, that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. So just for 1 more black, you can set it onto level 2. And assuming you've been discarding in turn 1 and turn 2, and they've been playing cards, then they're probably going to be pretty low. And if not after this turn, a couple turns later, they're definitely going to be out of cards in their hand and start to take some damage. And then the last phase of this card, at the beginning of your draw step, you can draw an additional card for each opponent has 1 or fewer cards in hand. So you may not get to that one, but if it ever goes to the late game and you guys are both top decking, then basically you're gonna always win the top deck wars because you're gonna be drawing 2 cards. We're also running a couple go for the throats for removal, and Souls of the Lost is a 2 drop that lets us sacrifice a permanent and or discard a card, and it comes out and it scales with the amount of permanent cards in our graveyard. So kind of my thought process with Souls of the Lost. We got these hopeless nightmares. We got these tiny bones. I always say tiny boings. I don't know why. Tiny bones joins up. We can sack those to the Souls of the Lost. Get it in our graveyard. Sacking your hopeless nightmare is what you want to do anyway because it gives you the scry effect. So that might be another reason to run the four of tiny bones instead. Either way, you have these things that you can sack. You can even sack your bandits talent if you have too many of them on the field. There's plenty of things that you can sack. With the Souls of the Lost, you can sacrifice a land if you don't really need one of your lands. Either way, you'll get some of these in your graveyard, and it can get bigger and bigger. So seems pretty decent in the deck. And then Hostile Investigator was a very good discard payoff card that we got in the previous set in the big score part of the cards, and makes the opponent discard a card. And whenever one or more players discard a card, then you investigate, and it's 4 mana 4/3. So 4 mana 4/3 comes in, they discard a card, and you get a clue token to draw a card later. So yeah, it's pretty much always a 2 to 3 for one. Very solid card. In the 5 mana slot, we're these aren't exactly 5 mana slots, but we're running Harvester of Misery. It acts as a removal for 2 mana for -2/-2. And late game or mid to late game, I guess I could say, you can use it as kind of a semi sweeper, giving all creatures -2/-2. We also are running Gix Command for another type of sweeper that also has lifelink attached to it. Also means we can return some creatures to our battlefield that we may have discarded or that got killed early on. So it's a good way to record some of those important threats. And then kind of more fun of one ofs. We got Aklazotz. It's a big creature that's hard to kill, and you can keep bringing it back when the opponent has no cards in hand. It also gets paid off pretty good when the opponent has no cards in hand and you attack, because you basically will draw cards out of it. So seems pretty good. Might want it as a 2 of, starting with a 1 of just to see how it works out. And then finally, we have one of the Shieldred. This is the Shieldred that when it comes into the battlefield, the opponent sacrifices a creature. It also has the ability that if they have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, then you can flip this and turn it into like a pretty nice enchantment here on the back, which kills a lot of things and then gets you a bunch of creatures from graveyards. So it also plays pretty nice with the fact that you've been making the opponent discard a lot of cards. All right, so that's about it for the idea of the deck, and we do have some pretty decent lands. I mean, we're in mono black, so we don't care too much. We got Swamp, Mirrex, Fountain Port is the new one, which can make tokens, treasures, and draw cards in some cases. Field of Ruin, since we don't really care about, um, like we got a lot of black lands, so we can afford to play Field of Ruin. And then Fable Passage also similar. Plus Fable Passage lets us put cards in our graveyard, which helps to make our Souls of the Lost bigger, which is good, which is what we want. So overall, it seems decently solid. Most of your stuff is 1 to 2 mana. You have a few 4 and 5 drops. And then you don't really need to think of Harvester as a 5 drop because a lot of time you're going to cycle it uh, on for the 2 mana, not cycle, but discard to get the effect for it. So yeah, that's the mono black discard deck. We'll tweak it as we go along. This is still the initial concept phase. So of course, if you try it out, you might need to adjust things here or there. But hopefully you got a picture of how the deck is supposed to work. So that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed. Have a blessed day and see you next time.